People think measurement is just about knowing how much you spent and how much you got back. They think it's a report you run once a quarter or a dashboard that sits on someone's desk collecting dust. But that's not how measurement works. That's not how it changes things. If you build measurement into your culture, you get something else entirely. You get a feedback loop so tight that every decision becomes smarter, faster, and more precise. You can shift budget mid-campaign, reallocate based on real data instead of guesswork, and you don't just measure performance, you control it. You spend the same money, but you're getting a different result because your team is constantly learning from what's working and what's not. It isn't about the tools or dashboards. It's about how teams use insight to make decisions in real time. This is Marketing Science, the show about building systems that deliver data-driven decisions. I'm Mikey, and today we're talking about why measurement culture changes everything. So let's start with what this actually means. Building a measurement culture isn't about setting up KPIs or putting a table in a meeting room. It's about embedding the idea of testing and learning into how teams operate day to day. It starts with treating every campaign like a controlled experiment. You don't just launch, you build in a baseline, define success, then test and learn from what happens. That's what makes measurement powerful. What people do wrong is treat measurement like they're trying to prove something after the fact. But if you start measuring early, you can shift budget before it's too late. One brand ran a geo-test across 6 geos for 12 weeks. They set up a holdout group. They measured impact, and then based on real data, they shifted 10% of their social budget to the top performing regions. That's not just showing what worked. That's using that insight to make better decisions with future dollars. The math behind this decision wasn't complicated. It was simple. If the lower bound of the confidence interval showed a lift of 14% and they had a threshold of 8%, then they knew it was worth shifting budget. That kind of calculation only works when you're tracking performance in real time. Not at the end of the month, not after weeks of data collection. You have to be watching numbers as they come in, interpreting them quickly, and acting on them instantly. When teams do this right, when your teams are constantly measuring, adjusting, and learning from each other, you're building a feedback loop. The kind where every test teaches the next one, and over time, it becomes almost second nature. That's how you build measurement into your organization's DNA. Here's how you start building that culture. First, define what success looks like at the start of every campaign, not just revenue or conversions, but a real, measurable outcome that reflects your goals, whether it's awareness, retention, or loyalty. That baseline is critical because it sets the stage for everything else. Second, build in control groups and randomization. You can't just say, this worked, if you didn't test it against something else. Use holdouts, use A or B testing even if it's small. It doesn't have to be full-blown multivariate. Even a simple split test helps. Once you start doing this regularly, the team starts thinking like scientists. Third, track and analyze in real time. Not at the end of the month, not when you're looking back. The moment you see that one geo is delivering 14% lift, shift budget. Don't wait for a meeting. Don't send an email. Make it happen on the fly. That's how you build real momentum. Fourth, use data to inform what happens next. If the test shows that your audience in a certain region isn't converting, maybe try a new creative style or change the message entirely. You don't just collect numbers, you change strategy. And that's where the magic happens. Finally, make sure those insights get shared across the team. Not just between the PM and the analyst, all the way to the strategist, the designer, the creative director, because measurement is only as good as how it's used. If you don't build in learning into your culture, you're just collecting stats for reports. So here's what matters most. The one number that makes this all work, your team needs to measure before they spend. You can't know what works unless you've already started testing. It's not a fancy tool or a new framework. It's the discipline of checking what's working and what isn't, and acting on it immediately. In that example I just gave, they had a baseline, they defined success, they tested, they measured, and then they acted. That whole process took place in weeks, not months. The key was having confidence intervals built into their approach from the start. They didn't just measure and stop. They calculated what the real world impact could be, set thresholds for when to act, and made decisions based on that data alone. No debate, no guesswork. That's measurement culture in action. But here's where people mess up. They think they need to measure everything from day one, which leads to paralysis. Or they try to make it too complex. They set up too many variables, or they test for too long. That's not measurement, that's analysis paralysis. You need to start small. Run one test, learn one thing. Another common mistake, treating testing as a solo activity. Measurement isn't just one person's job. If your team doesn't know how to read a lift or interpret variance, you're not building culture, you're building confusion. That's what happens when people don't share the language of measurement. And then there's this idea that data is always perfect. It's not. There are noise, outliers, and sample sizes that don't tell the full story. But that's okay. You build in confidence intervals, set thresholds, and treat every test like a learning opportunity, even if it fails. If you don't do that, measurement becomes just another box to check. The real magic happens when you stop asking, did this work? And start asking, what can we learn from this? And then you start sharing those lessons with everyone involved. It's not enough to know the results of one test. You have to use those results to inform what comes next. Not just in the next campaign, but in how your entire organization approaches its decisions. There's also something important about timing here that many people miss. The geo test I mentioned didn't just run for 12 weeks straight. It was part of a larger pattern where they were constantly reevaluating their spend. Each week, they looked at the data, compared it against their baseline, and made adjustments. This isn't a one-off moment. This is an ongoing rhythm. They also had the confidence intervals embedded in their process from the beginning. So when they saw that 14% lift in one geo, they didn't just say, this is good. They looked at what the lower bound was, how confident they were in that result, and if it met their threshold. It was a system, not just a test. That's important because it's how you build trust in data. If everyone on the team can see that the confidence intervals are real and the thresholds are set ahead of time, then when a decision comes down, no one's surprised. They know it wasn't random. They know it was based on something they could have predicted. Another detail people often overlook is how this relates to budget allocation. The brand in question had a total social spend of around $180K. They didn't shift the entire budget, just 10%, which is what their model told them was statistically significant. It was a calculated risk, not a leap of faith. This kind of thinking becomes contagious when you do it consistently. You don't need a big investment in tools or frameworks to get started. You just need the mindset that every decision is a test, and every test teaches us something new. Over time, that makes your entire operation more adaptive, more intelligent. What's also worth noting is that even if some tests don't show what you expected, they still provide value. If one geo underperformed, for example, you learn not just that it didn't work, but why it didn't work. Was the creative wrong? Was the audience mismatched? The learning doesn't end with the result. It's also how you start building what I call a repository. This isn't just collecting data, it's using the accumulated knowledge of your past tests to improve future ones. Every campaign becomes better than the last because you're constantly feeding insights back into the system. The most powerful thing about measurement culture is that it changes how people think. Instead of waiting for meetings or reports, teams are always looking at performance and thinking ahead. It's a shift from reactive to proactive, from guesswork to real-time adjustment. This isn't about being perfect. It's about being smart, about using what you know now to make better decisions tomorrow. You shift budget, adjust messages, and reallocate time based on learning, not hunches. That's how you build a culture of measurement that changes everything. If this one earned its time, the full system is inside the course at learn.mikey.ai. I'm Mikey. Go measure what matters.